Well, let's bring in three members of Parliament now to discuss the federal government's new gun control proposals. Pam Damoff is an Ontario Liberal MP and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety. Raquel Dancho is a Manitoba Conservative MP and her party's critic for public safety. And Alistair MacGregor is a BC New Democrat and his party's public safety critic. Good to see you all. Pam Damoff, the whole purpose of gun control measures is to make Canadians safer. How will this bill do that?
Well, there's a number of measures in the bill, including a national freeze on handguns, ensuring that firearms are removed in situations of domestic violence. And in situations with restraining orders, we're giving law enforcement additional tools to be able to investigate firearms crimes, as well as increasing penalties for certain firearms-related activities. And taken as a whole, this is probably the most comprehensive measures that have been taken in a generation, and it's the result of listening to Canadians. Okay, go ahead.
No, sorry. We're going to drill down on some of those things that you mentioned as we go along here. But let me bring in Raquel Dancho. What's your party's assessment? What's your assessment of these measures? Do they go at least some way in making Canadians safer? That's the whole purpose.
No, they do not. It was quite a disappointing announcement, actually. I think Canadians are quite concerned about the rising gun violence that we've seen over the past 7 years that Justin Trudeau has been our prime minister. Their record so far has been failure. They have failed to make communities in our major cities safe. Gun violence has consistently gone up since they've been in government, and they have spent more money than any other government in history, and yet they have not been spending those resources where they could really make a meaningful impact on reducing gun violence. So we're talking about beefing up border security to stop the gun smuggling from the United States, which we know is the major source of gun violence in this country. Gangs smuggle in guns from the U.S. and use them in Toronto in violent crime. We also know that police resources are incredibly strapped, which really impacts their ability to tackle guns and gang issues in our cities as well. We also do believe that grassroots anti-gang community organizations should be heavily invested in. That's how we can divert youth from leading a life of crime in the first place. So none of those things were addressed in yesterday's announcement.
Mr. MacGregor, what's your view of whether these measures will make Canadians safer?
Well, I think it's important to remember that, gun crime is an incredibly complex problem. It is the result of many different factors, and it's not going to be solved by itself by a piece of legislation. It's going to require a whole host of things working together. What I will say is that, many Canadians are looking south of the border at what happened in Buffalo, at what happened in Texas. Many communities do not feel safe. There has been a rise in gun crime. But, the Liberals in the previous Parliament introduced a Bill C-21. They let it sit for a while, and then there was an unnecessary election. Now we have the reincarnated Bill C-21. So I just want to be sure that if we're actually going to be serious about tackling this problem, that the Liberals are going to actually devote some parliamentary resources to this so that we can go ahead with a study, that we can bring forward witnesses, because it's not going to be just C-21 by itself. There's a whole host of other things that need to be included, and that's what we're going to be fighting for.
Pam Damoff, as alluded to by Raquel Dancho, most of the handguns used in crimes in this country are smuggled in through the United States. So how does putting a freeze on legal sales and ownership prevent that from happening?
Well, first I'll say I agree with everything that my Conservative colleagues said, and that's why we're doing all of that. We're investing in communities with the $250 million Building Safer Communities Fund. We've invested in border services, cuts that were made under Harper. We've made significant investments. In the last year, we've doubled the number of firearms found at the border, and we're investing in community groups. Can we do more? Absolutely. But none of that would be put in legislation. And with this bill, we know that firearms are definitely smuggled across the border. But depending on where you live, when I spoke to the head of the one of the police associations, he said in the city of Edmonton, the guns that are being used in Edmonton are actually domestically diverted. So as my colleague from the NDP said, there's a number of things that we need to be doing here. This is one tool in the toolbox, this legislation, to keep Canadians safer. But we're taking a whole of government approach. We're making sure that we are making the investment investments in law enforcement, the border, in
Okay.
communities to keep guns out of criminals' hands.
Raquel Dancho, the handgun freeze does have the support of many big city mayors who've been witness to the increasing gun violence in their streets. They see it as a first step toward an all-out national ban. What are those mayors missing if they think the handgun ban is a good move?
I think they're maybe missing some conversations with their local police authorities. When we studied the guns and gangs issue at National Security and Public Safety Committee recently, we heard from the deputy chief from the Toronto Police who confirmed that bans will have no impact on their gang and gun issue happening in Toronto, which is really the epicenter of where we're seeing a lot of this handgun violence. They confirmed criminals do not follow bans. So when the Prime Minister says that this will stop any handgun ban usage, he is misleading Canadians. Criminals will not be deterred by this ban whatsoever, and they will not be deterred by any buyback program either. Police consistently tell us that they know criminals will not be following these bans. So it really just provides a very misleading picture to Canadians. Saying this is going to stop gun violence, again, is untrue because we know criminals will not be following these laws as they don't follow laws right now.
Mr. MacGregor, what's your view on the handgun freeze when many people have been hoping for a handgun national ban?
Well, with respect to Ms. Dancho, I don't think it's quite as black and white as that. Like what we saw over the last decade was there was a 70% increase in handgun ownership in Canada. So there's roughly 1.1 million registered licensed handguns that are in circulation now. And I think it is a fact that when you do control the number of handguns in circulation, you do prevent the number that can be illegally diverted, in other words, stolen. So again, I think the freeze is something that, my caucus and I are going to have to take a close look at. But what's important to realize here is that if you already have a restricted possession and authorization license and own a handgun, this legislation is not going to affect you. So
Right.
People who already own handguns are not going to be affected. And I think it's a policy tool that deserves further exploration. I'm not ready to just throw it out now. I think it does need some further examination. And that's what our job as parliamentarians is.
Okay, and we'll have a chance to do some of that further examination at another time. Time's short tonight, but I want to thank you all for giving me your perspectives to our audience. Appreciate it, and we'll talk soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.